Good morning. I'm on, good. Well, I'm probably the most unlikely person, I would think, to address this group. I had no idea when Jack called and asked me if I would come address a conference. You mean there's a conference of ground source heat pump people that get together? How many people must there be? And I'm surprised as I look out at the numbers. At first thought is, whoa, this many people want to come talk about, drilling in the earth. And then as I was sitting here thinking about it and all the things I know now, why isn't this room 5 times, 8 times bigger? And I think that's the real thing I want to share with you is my journey. I'm a hospitality guy, and not into the development, but in opening restaurants around the country. And I decided to retire, and in my retirement to our country home, I was fearful, and the story I'm going to share with you is our journey to save our own backyard. It didn't start out as a journey of intellectual environmentalist. It was just a very selfish thing of wanting to save our country farm on the edge of Atlanta. And in that journey, we discovered geothermal. So, Jack, you didn't prepare me, I don't think, for who I was going to be talking to, because I didn't bring any stories about body odor or deodorant or any of those things. And I realized, how many engineers are in the room? How many people are engineers? And yeah, a lot of hands. How many people you would call yourself marketing of lifestyle? Yeah, so, I might need an interpreter as we go along here because I'm not sure you're going to understand what I'm talking about, and I realize on my entire journey of geothermal, I was looking for a lifestyle product, and everyone that wanted to talk to me about geothermal wanted to talk to me about the engineering. And I continue to have that issue today. I think a good example is we have and I'll show you some pictures. We had an area that in this development, and it was about 14 units to an acre, so it was high density. And we're visual snobs and all the things about lifestyle. And so I was concerned about all of the noise that I was going to have in 14 units in an acre around a courtyard, and how could we possibly use that courtyard. And someone suggested this technology that was geothermal. And so they started telling me all about the energy. And all I was interested in was it quiet? And I couldn't get them to talk to me about how quiet it was. It was just about all the energy and all the savings. And they were so excited about all the engineering of it. And so I think that's the journey. So if you can put that other hat on as I share what we did and how we got to that journey. So as I said, I was a hospitality guy, and our entire journey started when my wife saw on the back of the Georgia Preservation newsletter that there was a farm for sale on the edge of Atlanta, just 25 minutes from the airport. Now, we had 3 small children, not interested in buying any country house. But if any of you have had children, have small children, on Saturdays you're looking for something to do. So we decided, wouldn't this be fun to see really if there was open land on the edge of Atlanta? And so I called and asked if they had any farm animals. Oh, yes. And so I declared that I wasn't interested in buying anything, but we would like to take a drive out, and would they mind if we just pulled into the barnyard to show our small children the farm animals? And of course, anyone with anything for sale says, come on. We arrived, the Shetland pony was saddled, and we bought the farm. So here we are in 1991. I decided it was a good investment, this open land. It was 60 acres on the edge of Atlanta. And why not? It pleased the 4 females in my life. All those children were little girls. And we rented the main house out, and my wife said she would fix the shack in the back, which you see in the lower corner there, in case we ever wanted to spend the night. We envisioned coming out once a month maybe and getting some horses and all those kinds of things. Well, to my amazement, she fixed that shack where we had no toys except a puzzle for very rainy days, and that's where the entire family wanted to go every weekend. They chose to, on the spring break, summer break, to go to the shack rather than Disneyland. And so doing that every weekend and every vacation for 3 years, it was a real value shift for me and what was really important. And so in 1994, I sold that company. We were 34 restaurants around the country. Had a great Rolodex because we had one restaurant just a few blocks from the state capitol. And back in those days, you had a little buzzer that could get you from the bar to the desk so you could punch the button on what you were voting for. But I gave all that up, sold that big house in the city that had all the trappings of the pool and the media room and everything that money could buy to make those little girls happy. And we retreated to the farm on the edge of Atlanta and started restoring the 1905 country house. So life was great. I was very successful in the hospitality business. We traveled to Europe with the family. I decided I was set to retire at a young age for life. And then in 2000, we were feared that the bulldozers were coming our way for the urban sprawl. One morning, we were jogging along what was then our property line. I had acquired 2 more pieces of property, so in 2000, we had 300 acres. And my daughter and I were jogging along the property line, and the bulldozers were bulldozing the forest next to us. And I ran out and I stopped the guy, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "We've just been hired to clear the trees. I guess they're putting houses in. That's what always happens." I ran back to call the retired doctor who I knew owned it to get a hold of him. I couldn't get anyone on the phone. So I started calling other landowners in the area. And 5 weeks later, when the doctor returned from Europe, I had another 600 acres under contract in that desperate effort to save my own backyard. Well, it turns out the doctor had sold to another neighbor who I hadn't called, who was putting in a pasture airstrip for his little prop plane. So the immediate threat of development was over, but here I was with 900 acres and concerned about both the value of my investment and the quality of our life in this still rural area on the edge of Atlanta. A dear friend of mine was Ray Anderson. Any of you in the environmental community will recognize Ray. He developed the carpet square and interface carpet. He'd been a friend of ours for years, his stepson, godfather to our 30-year-old. And so at dinner one night, I said, "Ray, you know all the smart people. Who can you find that could help me save my backyard here? Because urban sprawl is coming our way." And Ray was the first chair of the White House Council on the Environment. And so he asked the Rocky Mountain Institute to assemble thought leaders of the day. And so in September of 2000, 23 thought leaders came to Serenbe. Georgia Tech documented the whole entire conference on what some of the issues were around the environmental movement. After the meeting, I was a little irritated because in 1994, I stepped off this treadmill. I decided there was too many issues that I could even worry about. And now Ray was bringing all of these thought leaders that were really basically talking about a lot of the serious environmental issues. I said, "Ray, I just want to save my own backyard. I don't have time. I don't think, we're a lost cause." Now, it's hard to remember, I think, where we were in September of 2000. The first LEED building had not been certified. No one knew what LEED was. There were only a few voices that were really talking about a lot of the environmental issues, and anyone that was considered some liberal tree hugger. It's amazing how far we've come in these 17, 18 years, because now, to be concerned about a lot of the same issues, you're a wise businessman, and every Fortune 500 company requires a certified building, because we know it makes economic and business sense. So it's fun for me to stand in the same place and be considered this liberal tree hugger that most of the development community laughed at, to now being a wise visionary. And our governor asked me to look at a lot of the development issues for Georgia. So standing in one place, the industry is moving along really far. And so the industry that you're in ground source heat pump, I think the opportunity is huge, but you're going to need an interpreter possibly about lifestyle, because that's where the issue is moving, as we've found, versus the dollars and cents and the technology, which makes all the common sense in the world, but somehow there's a communication exit. And so I'll show you where we've come and how we've come to it. So once I realized that there wasn't anyone that was going to help me, that I needed to do it, we started looking at examples around the country. And we realized that most good examples created actually a destruction of the area or whatever they were doing. We looked at Prairie Crossing outside Chicago, Seaside down here in Florida. And so I stepped back and decided to look at the larger area. And the map you're looking at now is 65,000 acres on the edge of Atlanta, just 20 minutes from the airport. And it remains undeveloped, with the Serenbe, what I'm going to share with you, is the first in that 65,000 acres. That's half the size of the inside of the perimeter of Atlanta. Napa Valley would be 45,000 acres. It would fit right inside it, to give you some idea. So we brought 500 landowners together over the period from 2000 to 2002 to change the zoning laws. And through that, we looked at all the issues and options that we had. Now, we had pro-development, land speculators. We had lifestyle people. The inherited landowners were really divided. Half were waiting for payday when development came to this area, and the other half wanted their grandchildren to grow up in the countryside as they had. So we had this diverse group. We brought this group together in a 2-year period for a united vision about balanced growth. Balanced growth is something we don't hear a lot about today. It's either the greedy developers on one side or the tree-hugging conservative preservationist on the other. So we were looking at where that balanced growth could be. And we have come up with an overlay and a zoning plan that actually will save 70% of the land compared to disturbing over 80% in the old sprawl model that we're all very familiar with. Now, this isn't a sacrifice for developers or for the whole building industry, because by clustering development, we will actually put 20% more housing in. You can have mixed use with all the commercial, and the key thing is the infrastructure is 40% cost to install and to maintain. So here is where it makes a lot of sense. And this is no different than we developed 80, 100 years ago, before we had the automobile where we could spread. Now, what's really interesting is you're looking about what the millennials and the baby boomers are doing is they're moving to urban areas, they're moving to walkable communities, they're moving to where there's higher density for social reasons and a lot of other issues that come about. So this is really a moving trend in where we live. So Serenbe today is 70% protected land, a combination of both rural and urban, with the urban centers in the middle of a protected forest. We are focused on 4 key areas, and that is the agriculture, arts, health, and education. We think those are some of the foundations for a healthy, vital community. Now, we're also an environmental community because this is one of the foundations that we realized in smart development. It should be environmental. This was the beginning of LEED certification. A lot of people back then thought anything environmental must be ugly 70s architecture and contemporary. So our very first restaurant, which by the way was opened in the middle of the woods by the time the fourth resident had moved in, remains today the smallest silver LEED certified building, and it looks very historic. You'll see it there in the bottom right corner. In Georgia and now the Southeast, there is a certification that's called Earthcraft. It's for Earthcraft houses, and they actually predated LEED certification in looking at wise construction, and you get points for all the things that you do, including geothermal. I like Earthcraft because they actually inspect the house a minimum of 3 times. So by the time I have a certification on any of our houses or any of our commercial buildings, I know that not only do I have a certified set of plans, I also have a certified building. And so we are completely certified, and we were one of the first communities in the test group to be a complete certified community as a whole, with every building being certified. I'm just going to run through and give you some idea of what Serenbe is. This map shows you 500 acres of what today we own 1,400 acres, but we're setting the tone for development in this entire 65,000 acres. And other development hasn't happened because generally the developers are not quite sure what we're doing or what the regulations are, and that's just starting to happen, and this is an entire new trend. This shows you we have 4 basic phases. Selborne, which was our first phase, with a focus on the art, and that is primarily the housing is all built out. We have a planned hotel, conference center, and an entire lifestyle environmental center that is yet to be developed. Our phase 2 in the bottom right corner is Grange, focused on agriculture, and we're finishing most of the building there. As I mentioned, I'm not the developer, I'm the hospitality guy, so we stepped into this very, very gently. And everyone had laughed about what we were doing. I couldn't get it funded. Thank goodness I was a believer in Midtown Atlanta in the 70s and 80s when we were developing a walking neighborhood. And so I bought land there, and I used that land to fund what we did in that first phase. The real estate community and the banking community were laughing at me. Some of my good friends came out and wanted to know where the marijuana patch was because they were sure I was on something. And so I leveraged what I had, and we put the infrastructure for the first 40 houses. I put a note out to people who there'd been some interest in it, and people had come down. We'd started a bed and breakfast down in some of the outbuildings, and so I sent them a note saying, well, I finally have the funds. We're going to start the infrastructure, and here's the prices on 40 lots. And in 48 hours, they were sold. I raised the prices 20%, and within 6 weeks, I had the other 40% sold. So I had nothing to sell. So we had to start planning, and I planned the next group, and we started building those first 40, and I finally got those on the market, and my builder who was down there took the entire next phase. I had nothing to sell again. I did that again, had nothing to sell. So I said, man, this development business is really easy. A lot better than the hospitality business. So I guess I'll borrow some real serious money, and we'll put in this whole Grange. I just showed you our phase 2. So we got the engineers, the bulldozers, all the infrastructure, and so I finally got those 120 lots platted just in time for the end of 2007. So we had an interesting time of living through the Great Recession, but I'm still standing, and we're thriving, and so it shows you common sense development is a place for it. Our third phase, which we're in the middle of doing now, is larger than any. It'll be 500 housing units, We are building about 130 of them in the first commercial, and then our fourth phase on education is in the conceptual plans. This shows you what a Selborne looks like. A lot of environmental pieces with it, in that there is no lawns are allowed because that's a real water source and chemical source, and so we don't allow lawns. So there you see a picture of the main street and all the wildflowers going on. It's a community that focuses on art and art streets. There you'll see an aerial view of what it looks like with the houses in an omega shape. Every back door faces a preserved area of a forest, a farm, a wildflower meadow, or a pasture. But every front door you come out into a community street, and it's a village atmosphere that's all very walkable. That first phase is focused on the arts, and we have a real model now in arts development and how important arts is. 1% of every house sale now and forever will go to fund the Serenbe Institute, which is focused on arts and environmental education. We have one of the Playbill out in New York named our theater one of the 20 outstanding theaters in the United States today. We have artists in residence. We have ballet. Go to our webpage and look at our events calendar. There's something happening every week, many things every week. And we're a community of geothermal. Now remember I told you that we had that first section. It's these live works with the store downstairs, the residence upstairs, and these units that you see on the street, they back up to that courtyard you see in the lower half. And this is where I was really concerned about noise, because if we had a typical compressor on the roof in the back, these units have no back door. The front door's on the street, the back door's on this courtyard. And so that was my search for something, a system that was quiet. I had no idea what ground source heat pump was. And it was great that it was environmental, but our real concern was what was quiet. And that's one of the big issues that I don't think is talked about enough is lifestyle issues, because that's what really led us to make that decision. Now, that courtyard that you see is a geothermal well field with 36 geothermal wells in that courtyard. So that's a great story to tell as we bring people along. In our second community, it's focused on agriculture. So you see the architecture there looks very much more country and rural. That's a picture of the general store. I think next to that is the store. You see Bosch opened an experience center, and that shows the experience center that was there for 5 years. With Bosch, as a little White House, we opened a demonstration house. That was in 2013. We had 18,000 people through that. And I thought, man, now we're really going to show everybody the wisdom of geothermal. Because here we have a house that shows, and everyone was talking about the cost savings, right? You all know the cost savings and the payback, and all the literature about the payback. And that was all true, and so here we had an example, and you could stand, you can watch the meter running backwards because it's Earthcraft certified, which reduces the energy 35%, geothermal, reducing it another 35%. And so by the time they put the solar on the roof, they were able to put 1/3 the solar because we'd already reduced the demand by so much. And so there you can watch that meter run backwards generally. And I thought, man, we have the demonstration. And yet, as we tried to convince our homeowners, they would look at the dollar savings, and then the wife would generally say, well, what's the cost of granite countertops? And they would choose granite countertops. And so it's curious looking out in the room how few decision makers you have sitting in the room to help you as you guide your marketing and your story. Because guys, it's not you making that decision. We all know that, right? Anybody who's married? It's the lady in the house making the decision on where you're going to spend the money. And she doesn't care about the engineering or even the cost savings generally. But if you talk about noise, if you talk about landscaping and what they don't have to landscape around, suddenly there's interest, and we have found that. So it was very frustrating to me as we had the perfect model that I couldn't get more of our homeowners to actually buy in to geothermal. Now, this is a whole community about food and agriculture, which is the other piece. But we're also a community of geothermal. Now, in high-dense areas, I continued to require the development, whether it was the builder, we have a cluster of houses, they had to do geothermal. And this is an apartment building and condo. It's 28 units. And I required them to put geothermal in. And so the paddock next door to the horse stable is where the geothermal wells are. Steve, how many wells are in that paddock? Do you remember? 54 wells in that paddock that handle that 20-some unit apartment. But I had to require it. So as we set out to do our third community motto, which, by the way, is about health and wellness, and in each community, I look at the architecture that goes along with what we're trying to communicate. And so as some of your early foundation went to Sweden, I too went to Sweden to look at the architecture and some of the things, because as we were looking at health and wellness, I found that the Scandinavians were really addressing a lot, especially for children and seniors. In America, we tend to lock them both up for their own protection, we think, and I don't really think we're doing them any good. And in Scandinavia, it's very different. So we really looked at a lot of the youth programming and a lot of especially how they're handling seniors and senior lifestyle and integrated into the community. So a lot of our architecture there is from Scandinavia. But this is going to be our most dense community of all. And so I was still struggling with how do we bring more geothermal in, because I realized it was important for the lifestyle, not only because we were an environmental community, but the lifestyle is what I was really interested in. And my builders that were doing spec products, because we started most of this as spec, shared with me their bankers simply would not fund a spec house and the premium that geothermal required. And I got it. I mean, they had a problem because the banking industry and the appraisal industry is not educated on your industry. And they don't honor the value that it has both for the homeowner and for the nation as a whole. And that was very frustrating to me. Now, about this same time, we were getting more and more houses that had a zero energy bill. And so as we were laying out all of the infrastructure, my local power utility said, you know, Steve, if you keep reducing the demand, we're going to have to charge you an access fee to the grid. I said, man, y'all, I'd sure like some help in doing all this. Instead, you're going to put roadblocks in front of me. And I said, why don't you become my geo utility? You're only thinking about your business model of sending energy to me over a power line. Why don't you think about drilling into the ground and becoming a utility so that you're capitalizing in a different way from the savings we have? And they came back 3 months, scratched their head and said, I don't know. We just don't understand. Now, luckily, it was the same power industry that had blocked a lot of the solar initiatives legislatively. Now, they didn't understand enough about ground source heat pump to block it. So I formed our own utility. And we now have a geothermal utility. And for these some 500 housing units in Motto, it's not a question of will it be geothermal, it is geothermal. And so now my builders, they only have to sign that they have agreed it's geothermal, and it's not an economic, they don't have to borrow the money from it because I do all the upfront costs. And then at the time of the first ownership is when that first owner decides whether they want to buy the system from our utility and take all the tax advantages, or if they want to get a bill. Now, the math is exactly the same as in Grange, our second community that we tried sharing with them, and they still chose granite countertops over geothermal. And so we had less than 20% of our homeowners buying geothermal. Today, we are in the mid-70s, and that's moving up. When it's not a choice, this is what's happening. Your only choice is whether you're going to buy the system or whether you're going to get a utility. So this is a complete different model that makes economic sense. My investors, it was really I don't know if we should do this, and it was the last, really a passionate plea that we needed to do it. It makes sense for our utility, it makes sense for each homeowner, and it makes sense for the environment. So that's a complete different approach. Now, this entire community is about health and wellness, which is noise pollution, which is a big thing with your competitors that you don't have in health communities. So as you look at lifestyle and the noise factor as we build denser communities, that is a huge piece. This is a big study that came out by the Global Wellness Summit in January. We were part of it. They had 125 press people from around the world talking about the new trend, and that's the economics of this health style real estate. Know about this, be able to talk that language, because that's going to move the needle to where you can increase the market share. And it's not about the engineering, it's about the lifestyle piece. So this shows you this entire 500 units are all mandatory geothermal. Here we have a house under construction. I took that picture just this weekend on the way down. It certainly has its challenges, but it's worth it. So the basic principles that Serenbe is built on is balanced growth, which we just don't talk about enough in this country, through land use. That whole land use idea of saving a lot of the property saves spaces for all of your well fields that you need. Locally sourced food is a huge thing that we need to talk a lot more about. Energy and water conservation is certainly something you all know about. I think we can talk about it in a lot different terms to really move the needle on the average consumer. And guys, it's the ladies making those decisions. And so when you're looking at the brochures and you're looking about some of this stuff, think about how to talk to that segment of the population, because they're the ones that are really making a lot of these decisions. And it isn't about the engineering language, it's about lifestyle language. Arts and education is a huge thing. And now we're looking at mental and physical health. And your product affects every one of these things in one way or another, and that's what I've come to discover, and it's why I'm a big believer and why we step forward to actually invest in it to the point of becoming our own utility to make it happen. Now, I mentioned those little girls, and I always get the question, what happened to them? This is the most recent family picture I found, and it was the wedding of our youngest daughter in November. The girls went off to Cornell, University of Colorado, and they have all now returned to Serenbe with their northern husbands, and that is our first grandchild. So I can walk to the front door of every one of my kids, and they're all working in various areas. So I think a big message is what we're doing at Serenbe is modeling how we built communities 80, 90 years ago. And my family, and I think we see more families for various reasons, returning to that lifestyle model of not spreading out because of the support of families. They're returning, and we're living more in community. And it takes a village to raise a family. So I think David Orr, I love David Orr's quote, that it makes far better sense to reshape ourselves to fit a finite planet than to attempt to reshape the planet to fit our infinite wants. And your industry is really capitalizing on that idea because you're using the resources of the earth in a wise way rather than consuming it. And so that's just a huge piece. Now we have an inn at Serenbe, the old farmhouse. We've moved to a townhouse in the community as a demonstration back in 2005, which, by the way, is also geothermal. My wife liked the idea because we didn't have a compressor out in our courtyard and we didn't have to landscape around it. So we put that geothermal in 2004 when we did that compound of the live-work units. But our old farmhouse now is a country inn. Between there and units in the community, we have 50 rooms. And so it's a great place to bring some of the folks that are on the edge of trying to decide what geothermal looks like for a community. Bring developers. I will share with them the wisdom of forming their own utility to make that possible, and all the both economic and lifestyle issues as to why that is. As I mentioned, when we started this, everybody thought I was just a hospitality kook smoking marijuana or something. And of course, to reinforce that, I had hair down to my shoulders when I stepped off the treadmill, and I just decided I didn't want to go to town. But we've now, after living through the recession and seeing all the trends, whether it's environment, whether it's lifestyle, pointed to this kind of thing, there's incredible interest in what we're doing. And so for that reason, we have started conferences. And next month, we will hold our second Biophilic Institute. As we started talking about this around the country, and I was invited to do talks like this, I had to think about what kind of our development was. I hadn't really thought about it. We'd had our head down in the trenches really doing this. And so you were new urbanist, yeah, but that's only part of it. You were farm to table, but that's only part of it. And so there's all sorts of pieces that we're part of. And we really realized that what we are is a biophilic design community. And of course, when I said that, that was a term popularized by E.O. Wilson, and it's that all living systems depend. So I think your logo of we're stronger together. If you look at the entire living system of the earth, that's true. And we realize that everything we do depends on the other, and so that's really biophilic design. And there are courses on this, and so now we're partnering with Tim Beatley at the University of Virginia, and this is a conference, and it really brings thought leaders from around the nation. At the last conference, MIT, Yale, Harvard, all your big universities showed up, and they'll be coming again. So if anyone wants to come, some of that registration's still open, and I have some flyers, and you can go to our webpage. And then we've really found that developers from literally around the world are interested in what we're doing. I'm amazed at how people find us through the internet. And so we have people coming in from all over. We're doing the fifth, what we call Nygren placemaking. And this is really focused to the development community. They're happy to bring their local legislators that deal with zoning, or their bankers or developers. So if you know of anyone that you want to send there, it's a 2.5 days, and we go through the entire area. We walk through the community, and we bring the various people in to talk about it. And we have one afternoon session on all the environmental, including ground source heat pump, to show them what that's going. This is our fifth that we'll be hosting, and so I think there's still some room for that. So it was wonderful being with you, and I don't know if there's time for if there's any questions. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.